say my last 7 years of my corporate, when I say my corporate life, throughout my whole professional career in the workplace, there was a lot of times where I felt like I'm going to a customer, I'm going to a relationship that's, I'm making a lot of money, and I don't feel good, or I'm second guessing myself. And there wasn't a really positive connection. And I wish I had this mantra back in the day, but now, because I do love what I do, that every time I show up to a team, anytime I do a keynote speaking engagement, or I'm working with a client, I always say, I get to do this. They want to hear me, and tap into your joy. And those three things are things that I can control, things that resonate with me, but that really connects me to my work, and it connects me to my confidence. And so therefore, like you said, if you're connected to your work and you're loving what you do, the money will follow. And I think just those three things sets the tone for me to really love what I do.
Yeah.
I wish I created that a long time ago. That would have made me have a different perspective going into my clients when I was in sales. But, it is what it is. But I think right now I'm living it. I'm playing a big game.
Yeah, I want to talk about your podcast a little bit. Rodney Mullen, a professional skateboarder, he invented a lot of the early tricks. He's got a saying called the barrier of disbelief. And your podcast talks about 90% mental. Where's that connection?
It's awesome that you brought him up. I've been trying to get him on my podcast. I think, there's a few things. I think when you think about 90% mental, there's a lot of people that say, sports is 90% mental. Some of them have an idea that it's 80% mental and 20% physical. Whatever that number is, I think no matter how physically talented you are, you got to have a mental game, and it's going to outweigh how physical and how great you are. Because I have seen incredible, and even myself, I've seen incredible athletes that are the best on the team, but in that moment when the team and yourself need you the most, and you're not mentally geared and ready to do what you need to do, how good are you?
Yeah.
So that's why when I came up with the show 90% Mental, actually the phrase is from Yogi Berra, who's famous catcher for the Yankees, but it kind of resonated with, I'm trying to highlight mental performance. I'm trying to highlight the mental game. So bringing on athletes, coaches, Olympians, all levels, sports psychologists, authors, sporting execs to talk about the mental game. It just was fitting to me. It's very fitting.
Well, I think that mental space is equally important in a professional career too, and showing up to your job, in that headspace, like a professional athlete would be there as well, and going at it, with the potential that you bring to the table.
Yep.
I love the concept of your show. I see that you had Alan Stein on there, and I got to admit, I love his book that he came out with this last year, and I'm a huge fan of his, and I'm sure you enjoyed your time together with Alan.
Absolutely. Him and I hit it off, and his book, Raise the Game, is awesome. It's doing very, very well. And him and I had this, we had a common connection. My mentor, who is Graham Betchart, who is one of the predominant NBA mental skills trainers out there, trained him, worked with him a long time ago. And it was just great how, the things that Graham says connected with him a long time ago. And so as he was bringing stuff up and I was bringing stuff up, we were speaking the same, language. So that was kind of cool to connect with someone that had a connection to my mentor.
Yeah. Well, Alan, if you're listening, a little plug for you and your book. Love what you're doing. Matter of fact, I just bought one of his books last night on Amazon and sent it to one of my clients. So keep pushing out there, Alan. So, talk a little bit more about your business and what you do with Game Face Performance, and the values that people can extract from what you're doing.
Well, as a mental performance coach, I work with individual athletes, all levels. I work with teams, and I also work with coaches as well. There's a lot of times where I do work with coaches because there's not a lot of time that I have with the team, and the coaches have more access to their players than I do. So there's times where I teach coaches the mental game, and I push it down through them so they can actually teach it to their team. And I also work with, like I said, executives, corporate athletes, and more or less I work with corporations that do leadership training, which I kind of blend in mental skills. But the things that I address, it's the whole gamut. You know, when you think about a performer in the workplace or in an athletic environment, they're working with their thoughts and emotions. How do they prepare them? How do they align them? How do they realign them? So how do they focus and refocus? So when it comes to refocusing strategies, mindfulness strategies, you know, again, we're doing a lot of breathing work, intentional work, a lot of mindfulness, a lot of visualization. So, I mean, I work with a lot of performers that are dealing with confidence issues, motivational issues. So, I mean, when you think about all the things that come up when you perform, my job is to put a process in place so you can change your behavior.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about process, and, you know, I've had the pleasure of working with some top athletes of our generation and past generations. I mentioned Bill Walton. I've worked with Arnold Palmer and Peter Jacobson and different football players, et cetera. And clearly you have a long list of talent. What fascinates me about these individuals is when you're sitting with them at a dinner table, they're very much like you and I, but you know that they have the ability to switch over mentally to become that super athlete and achieve the things that we've seen them do, whether it's on the court or on the field. And I believe that we all have that in us somewhere. How do we find and extract that? Because, you know, the human brain is so incredible, and I think that just our physical makeup is incredible as well. And if we can get the two in sync on a regular basis, I think we're all able to achieve greatness. And I'm just baffled by how we don't tap that more often, like some of these pros we've been around.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. It's a beautiful question because it's something that I work with athletes on the front end a lot. I call it the warrior mindset. I call it the shift or the switch. How do we actually let go of who we are and turn into this thing and immerse ourselves into the sport that we love? And then how do we actually turn that off? Because there's a responsibility when we're done competing and performing is to go back to who we are. And I think that's a key thing, is that I think a lot of athletes, and, you know, I would say younger athletes and performers, they don't know who they are. They're so wrapped up, their identity is wrapped up being an athlete. So if I can get them to understand that they're a brother or a sister, they're a gamer, they're an avid book reader, they're all these things outside of being the athlete, then they know what they're turning off to become something else. And there's a great story that one of my athletes that I worked with, he was an incredible football player. I mean, he was electric. He literally felt like he was Superman. And when I mean this, he went through this whole process of his switch was when he got into the locker room, as soon as he was taking his clothes off, he felt like the locker room itself was like a big telephone booth where Clark Kent went to go change into, you know, to transform into Superman. And as he put on his Superman shirt, he would wear this blue shirt with a Superman shield. He was feeling that the transformation was happening. And then as he put the Superman socks on, and which was really interesting, he was the only football player on the team that wore different socks. He was the only one that, for whatever reason, the coach let him. But he felt that when he stepped on the football field, that he was Superman. He let go of who he was. And it was just a beautiful thing, because when he would take, you know, kick returns, punt returns, when he was receiving or he was even playing defense, he was like, he did not look like the normal person I knew. He transformed. And he knew how to actually transform back into who he was, a 4.0 student, great manners, great teammate, great person. But when he went on that field, he just transformed into this incredible savage, if you will. And I mean that in a positive way. So when you get to see that, when you get to teach that, how to help someone switch on, man, it's a beautiful, beautiful experience.
Yeah, and, you know, we both have David Meltzer in common in our lives. What a wonderful human being for all the things that he does in his give back. But, you know, I think David has that Superman switch in his business life. You know, he talks about working, I don't know, some obnoxious amount of hours per week, you know, 180 hours a week or something crazy because he's so efficient and he's got his regiment and he works from 5 to 11, et cetera. I would love to see more people in business flip that Superman switch as well, because I could only imagine the things that we'd be capable of achieving.
Absolutely. And I think when you think about that switch, and I agree with you, David Meltzer is the man. But I think there needs to be a willingness to showing up. There needs to be a self-awareness, and there needs to be a vulnerability. You need to be courageous and brave to let go of who you are. There's a lot of stories where I've worked with athletes that just did not want to let go of who they were. And they were playing a sport that demanded them to be something different. There are some sports that demand you that if you're playing a game of football, well, that's a violent sport, and if you're not if you're a kicker, I get it. You probably don't need to put on that warrior mindset, but maybe you do a little bit, depends. But any other position in the game of football, man, that's a violent sport. You need to have a different mindset. You need to shift into something else. So I think you're right, man. I think I encourage people to, if you don't have that switch, you don't know what it is, you don't know what are the things that are going to actually trigger you into this alter ego, if you will. I'm here. I'm here to help you, because I think that we all have the ability, like you said, to turn it on. And I'll tell you what, who's really good at it, who I think is one of the best, is Kobe. Yeah. Kobe, that Mamba mentality is just it's beautiful to see him switch it on and switch it off.
Yeah. Allow me to have a little bit of a selfish moment. Well, not really selfish, because it's a thought for a friend, but I think it's applicable to this conversation. I have a lot of athletes that listen to this show, a lot of off-road professional racers, racing the Baja 1000 that they put on their Superman socks. But I also have a lot of the Spartan obstacle course racing series athletes as well, some of them at the very top of their game. I've got a really close friend, a female athlete. She's an elite Spartan racer. And I believe physically she has all the strength and ability to be on the podium at every race. But I think mentally she has beaten herself up over maybe some discouraging finishes. I think that she's extremely close to her competitors, and she looks at them as something that's unachievable. And I want her to shift that so bad. How do you work with athletes to get them out of that headspace where they just aren't quite hitting that top notch?
Well, I think every athlete has different dynamics they're dealing with, and some of the things that you're bringing up are real. I think when you, as an athlete, you start comparing yourself to other people, there's a beautiful quote out there that comparison is the thief of joy. And I think when we're free as athletes, I believe that we're in that realm of being joyful and joyous. And so when you're sitting there, you're literally taking that opportunity of being joyful because you're comparing yourself. Like, why are you doing that? Because when you start comparing yourself, you're negating all the hard work you put into your sport. All right? Let's honor that process. We move away from our process when we start looking at other people, mm-hmm. right? And I also think that we start looking at when we look at results and outcomes and stats, all those things are out of our control. They really are. So I think if you really want to judge yourself, judge on how present you are. Judge how present you are to your preparation. How judge yourself when you are focused, and when you get out of focus, how long did it take you to get it back into focus? Let's start looking at those things and measuring how present you are, because the process is going to drive the results. So I think if we can start getting people to get out of the comparison mode and really focus on the things that they can't control and measuring how present they are, then I think we're empowering the athlete to be more intrinsically motivated.
Yeah, and I think comparing ourselves to other people, oftentimes we look at them, especially if we spend a lot of time around them, and we get the notion of, gosh, I can't be what they are. I'm not as good as they are, because you spend that amount of time with them. And I think sometimes a separation is healthy to allow yourself to thrive in your own environment and realize that you are spectacular in what you're doing, and raise your own bar within yourself instead of trying to diminish what your abilities are because you're around somebody all the time.
Yeah. And I think it gets dangerous when you start getting that